I took the job because I needed somewhere quiet to fall apart. That's not exactly how I described it to myself at the time. At the time, I told myself it was practical. Steady hours, minimal physical demand, decent enough pay for a guy whose back had decided it was done cooperating. Former Chicago Fire Department, Engine Company 47, 8 years of service, and then one bad landing off a second-floor collapse, and suddenly I was a man with a prescription bottle and a lot of free time. The department was good about it, mostly. Paperwork, a handshake, a card signed by the guys. I moved my stuff into a storage unit in Pilsen and drove west until Idaho sounded far enough away. Orofino is small. Not charming small, just small. A hardware store, a diner on Main Street that only plays 80s rock, a gas station, a few hundred people who already know each other. I rented a room above a laundromat on 3rd Street and found the job listing on a corkboard outside the post office. Handwritten card, slightly damp. Park Timber Mill, night security, call Tommy. I called Tommy. The drive out to the mill was about 9 miles from town, following a 2-lane road that got narrower and less maintained the further you went. The Clearwater National Forest came right up to the edge of the road on both sides after the first few miles. Big pines, thick and close together, dark even in the afternoon. The kind of trees that don't let much light through. I'd grown up in Chicago. I was used to trees being decorative. These felt like something else. I kept my eyes on the road. The mill sat at the end of a gravel access road, backed against the tree line like it had been pushed there. First thing I noticed was the size of it, way bigger than I expected, sprawling. A main structure with a corrugated metal roof, 2 long, open-sided sheds stacked with cedar planks, a boiler building off to the left, and a chain-link fence around the whole perimeter with a rolling gate at the front. The gate had a spotlight mounted on a post beside it. I noticed the spotlight was aimed at the tree line, not the road. I figured that was just how it had been left. Everything smelled like resin and rot. Not bad exactly, just heavy. The kind of smell that gets into your clothes. Cedar and rust and something damp underneath it all. I parked by the gate and got out. The industrial saws inside the main building were old. Big circular blades, some of them pitted with rust along the teeth, mounted on frames that looked like they'd been there since the 40s. A few of them were missing guards. The kind of thing a Chicago OSHA inspector would have a full day with. Tommy Park met me at the gate. He was tall, angular, the kind of lean that looks permanent rather than healthy. Silver hair combed straight back, pale gray eyes, a long face with not much going on in it. He moved deliberately, like each step was a considered decision. He wore a collared flannel shirt tucked into canvas work trousers and shook my hand once. Firm, no warmth in it. "Caleb," he said. Not a question. He already knew my name. "That's me." He handed me a laminated card. Standard card stock, the kind you'd get at an office supply store, sealed in one of those cheap pouches. 5 lines of text, numbered. He didn't say anything while I read it, just stood there with his hands at his sides. The rules were specific. That was the first thing I thought. Not vague liability language, not the usual keep doors locked, call in emergencies stuff. Specific. 1. Keep the gate spotlight aimed at the tree line, not the road. 2. If the air smells like burnt hair, kill all interior lights for 10 minutes. 3. Never answer the phone after 4 rings. 4. If someone stands on a lumber pile, do not look at their feet. 5. If the emergency siren sounds without a fire, stay in the booth and open the door for no one. I read it twice. Then I looked at Tommy. "Insurance," he said. "Family's been running this mill for 100 years. Some of these go back that far. We keep them because we keep them." He said it the way you'd explain why the break room coffee was always burnt, just the way it was. "Any questions?" I had a few. I didn't ask any of them. I figured I'd think about it later and probably forget about it. "Booth's by the gate," he said. "Phone's in there. Emergency kits under the sink. Luis Herrera does the boiler checks each night. You'll see him come through around midnight. He's been here 30 years. He knows the building. He paused. Follow the rules. Then he walked to his truck and left. I stood there in the gravel with the laminated card in my hand and the smell of cedar and rot in my nose and the tree line sitting about 40 feet past the fence. The spotlight on the gatepost was still aimed at the trees. I left it that way. The booth was a prefab metal box, maybe 8 by 10, with a space heater, a folding chair, a desk bolted to the wall, and a window that looked out at the gate and the yard. There was a phone on the desk, black, corded, an emergency kit under the sink, like Tommy said. First aid stuff, a flare gun, 2 flares, a gallon jug of industrial degreaser someone had stored there for reasons I didn't investigate. I brought a thermos of coffee from the gas station and a paperback I'd bought at a Goodwill in Coeur d'Alene. A Lee Child novel, I think. I'd already read it once. The first night was nothing. The second night was nothing. The whole first week was nothing. I drank my coffee and read my paperback and did 2 perimeter walks per shift. Checked the gate lock, watched the yard. The saws sat still in the dark. The cedar stacks didn't move. The phone rang twice in 7 nights, both times before 4 rings, both times wrong numbers. I followed the rules the way you follow any workplace procedure when nothing has gone wrong yet, automatically, without much thought. The only thing that broke up the quiet was Luis. He came through around midnight every night, like Tommy said. Coveralls, steel-toed boots, a flashlight clipped to his belt even when the yard lights were on. He was barrel-chested and moved slow, not because he was tired, but because he was paying attention. Every time he crossed the yard, he had his nose tilted up a little, like he was checking the air. I noticed it the second night. By the 4th night, I was pretty sure it was a habit, not a quirk. He wasn't much for conversation. Neither was I, honestly. We'd exchange maybe 10 words a night. He'd stop at the booth window, I'd slide it open, he'd say something like, "Boilers are good," or "Wind's coming from the east tonight." I'd nod. He'd move on. That was usually it. On the 5th night, he stopped a little longer. "You read the card?" he said. "Yeah." He nodded once, slow. "Follow it." Tommy said it was for insurance. Luis looked at me for a second. Not hostile, just flat. "It's not for insurance." I waited for the rest of that. He didn't offer any. "What's it for?" I said. He looked out at the tree line. The spotlight caught the first row of pines and stopped there, everything behind them completely dark. He stood there for a moment with his nose tilted up, checking whatever he was always checking. "Every other business in this valley burned down at some point," he said. "Sawmill up near Pierce, gone. 2 operations over toward Kamaya, gone. This one's been standing 100 years. He looked back at me. "Follow the card." He walked off toward the boiler building. I thought about that for a while. Then I poured more coffee and found my page in the Lee Child novel and let the week finish itself out. Small town, old mill, local guy with local superstitions. I'd worked with firefighters who knocked on wood before every shift. People had their things. It didn't mean anything. That's what I told myself. The rules still felt like procedure. The week still felt like nothing. I had no reason yet to think either of those things was wrong. The 8th night, I was reading a paperback thriller I'd already read twice before. I'd found it in the break room, someone's forgotten copy with a cracked spine and coffee stains on the last 50 pages. Didn't matter. I knew how it ended. It was something to do with my hands. The booth smelled like old coffee and whatever industrial solvent the cleaning crew used on the floors. I'd gotten used to that. The spotlight sat on the tree line the way it always did. That first row of pines lit up pale and still. Everything behind them just a wall of black. Wind was low. The yard was quiet. Nothing on the monitors but empty lumber stacks and the dark shape of the boiler building across the gravel. That's when the smell hit. It came in fast, which surprised me. Not a slow drift, not something building from outside. It was just suddenly there, filling the booth in maybe 3 seconds. Burnt hair, thick and oily, the way it gets when a fire catches something biological, something with protein in it. I'd smelled it before. Structure fires, mostly. The kind of calls where you knew what you were walking into before you got through the door. This was that, but concentrated, like the source was right on top of me. I put the book down. My first thought was electrical. Old building, old wiring, something overheating in the walls. I looked at the panel on the side wall. No indicator lights. I looked at the monitors. Nothing. I looked at the yard. Nothing. The rule said kill all interior lights for 10 minutes. I sat there for probably 4 seconds just thinking about that. It felt stupid. It felt like exactly the kind of thing you'd feel stupid doing. I'm a former Chicago firefighter with a back injury sitting alone in a guard booth in Idaho turning off the lights because a laminated card told me to. That was the version of events I was aware of. I turned off the lights. The booth went dark. Not completely. The spotlight was still running outside, and some of that came back through the glass, enough to see the shape of the desk and my own hands. I left the monitors on. Their glow was faint and blue, and I figured that didn't count as interior lights. I didn't actually know if it counted. The card didn't specify. I left them on. I sat still and watched the yard. No fire anywhere, no smoke on the monitors. The tree line sat where it always sat, lit and motionless. I checked my watch. 11:42. I kept checking it. 11:43. 11:44. The smell wasn't fading. If anything, it got a little worse around the 2-minute mark, thick enough that I was breathing through my mouth without deciding to. Then something got on the roof. I heard it land. One impact, heavy, like a full pallet dropped from height. The sheet metal flexed and boomed, and I was out of my chair before the sound finished. Pure reflex, 7 years of emergency work just taking over. I stopped myself from going for the door. I stood in the middle of the booth with my hand not quite touching the door handle, and I listened. It dragged itself. That's the only way to describe it. Something heavy, moving slow, pulling itself across the roof in a direction I couldn't quite map. And the sound it made while it moved was wrong. Metal on metal, but rhythmic. Click, pause, click, click, pause. Like something with a lot of joints or something using a tool it wasn't designed to use. I'd heard industrial shears running, big hydraulic cutters we used on vehicle extractions. This was that sound, except there was no machinery involved. It was coming from whatever was moving. I stood there and did not go outside. That felt important to note. I wanted to. There's a reflex in emergency work where the sound of something wrong is a direction, and you go that direction. I stood on the other side of that reflex and stayed put. The smell peaked around the 6-minute mark and then started dropping. The clicking slowed. The dragging slowed. One more heavy shift of weight above me, the metal groaning once, and then nothing. I watched the monitor showing the east side of the yard, the spotlight showing the tree line. Nothing moved. Nothing appeared. At 10 minutes, I turned the lights back on. I stood in the booth for another minute, just breathing normal air. The smell was almost gone. My coffee was cold. The paperback was face down on the desk where I'd left it. I went outside. The roof of the booth was a corrugated metal panel, maybe 12 feet up, accessible from the exterior ladder on the north side. I walked around to the ladder and went up. My back complained about the angle, the way it always did on ladders, that specific pull in the lower left that I'd learned to work around. I got to the top and looked. There was a dent, not a small one. It ran about 4 feet across the center of the panel, deep enough that the metal had split in 2 places along the crease. Whatever made it had pressed down from above with a lot of weight concentrated in a small area. The edges of the dent had these narrow marks in them, parallel lines spaced about 2 inches apart, running along the crease. I crouched and looked at them for a while. I didn't know what made marks like that. I still don't. I climbed back down. I needed to talk to Luis. That was the whole thought. I needed to find Luis Herrera and stand in front of him and say what I'd just seen and hear what he said back. That was it. Just that. I walked across the gravel to the boiler building. The lights were on inside. I could see them under the door. I knocked. Nothing. I knocked again, harder. Luis. Nothing. I tried the handle. Locked. Not the padlock on the outside hasp. That was open, hanging loose. The interior lock. Locked from inside. I put my ear to the door. I could hear the boilers doing what boilers do, that low pressurized hum. Nothing else. I knocked one more time and said his name one more time, and then I stood there in the gravel with my hand still raised and thought about that. Luis was in there, or Luis had locked it from the inside and left through some other exit I didn't know about, or something else was in there that had locked it. I didn't love any of those options equally. I walked back to the booth. I sat down. I looked at the monitors. I looked at the tree line. I looked at the dent I could no longer see from inside, but knew was there. I thought about Luis saying the mill hadn't burned like every other business in the valley. I thought about the way he checked the air when the wind shifted, that specific tilt of his head, the way he always knew before I did when something was different. He wasn't telling folklore. I was pretty sure of that now. I didn't pick the book back up. I left the coffee where it was. I pulled my chair closer to the window and I watched the tree line for the rest of the shift, every hour of it, and the spotlight held on those first pale pines, and I did not look away from them for long. The next shift started normal. That was the thing. Clock in, check the monitors, pour the coffee, do the walk. Nothing on the cameras, nothing at the tree line. The dent in the roof was there if I stood outside and looked up, which I did once and then didn't do again. I came back inside and sat down, and that was when I noticed the logbook. It was wedged under the desk. Not hidden exactly. More like it had been pushed back there and forgotten, or pushed back there on purpose and left for someone who'd eventually go looking. The cover was brown leather, cracked along the spine, with no label on the front. I pulled it out and set it on the desk. It was heavy for its size. I opened it. The first page had a name and a start date. Ronald Salinas. The date was a little over 5 years ago. I knew that name. I was pretty sure I knew that name. I'd seen it somewhere on the drive into Orofino, on one of those small granite markers set back from the road in that old cemetery off Route 12, the one with the iron fence. I wasn't certain. I'd only glanced, but it stuck with me now in a way it hadn't then. The early entries were normal. Shift logs, times, temperatures, equipment checks. Ronald wrote in small, even print that was easy to read. Boilers at normal pressure. Gate secured. No incidents. The kind of notes you write when you're doing a job and nothing is happening and you want a record that proves you were there. I'd written the same kind of notes in my first week. Probably would have kept writing them if the 8th night hadn't gone the way it did. I kept reading. Around the 3rd week of his entries, something shifted. The handwriting got a little tighter. The observations got more specific. He started noting things like wind direction, whether the spotlight had moved, whether the boiler room door was warm when he touched it. Small things. The kind of things you only start tracking when something has already made you nervous and you're trying to figure out what it was. Then, about 6 weeks in, he wrote, "Asked Tommy about the rules today. He said insurance. I don't think it's insurance." That was it, one line. Then the next entry went back to boiler readings. But after that, the notes changed. He started writing more at night, mid-shift, in the margins and on the backs of pages. The print got looser. Some words were underlined twice. He'd started doing research, I think. because there were references to things I didn't recognize. Names, dates, something he kept calling the agreement. He wrote, Park family, 1887. The mill should have burned. Every mill in this valley burned. This one didn't. I already knew that part. Lewis had told me the same thing, more or less. But Ronald had gone further. He'd found something. I wasn't sure how. He didn't explain where the information came from, just wrote it down like he was getting it out of his head before he lost it. The gist of it was this. The Park family had made some kind of arrangement with whatever lived in the Clearwater Forest. Old arrangement, pre-electricity, pre-telephone, pre-most things. The forest got a residence. The mill, sitting right at its edge, open and operational, a permanent presence on its border. And periodically, the forest got an offering. In exchange, the mill didn't burn. The timber stayed good. The equipment held. The business survived every fire season that took everything else in the valley. Ronald called it the Pact of the Wood. His words, not mine. I'm not great at naming things like that, but he seemed to have thought about it. The middle section of the logbook was hard to read. Not the handwriting, just the content. He'd started figuring out the shape of it, the timing, and he was scared. You could tell. He wasn't writing like someone documenting events anymore. He was writing like someone trying to think their way out of something while they still could. Sentences ran long. He'd start a thought, and then interrupt it with something else, and then come back. The rules aren't protection, they're management. They keep you in place. They keep you cooperative. The spotlight isn't keeping anything out, it's... And then that entry just stopped. I turned the page. The last third of the logbook was different. Shorter entries, more space between them, like he was conserving something, energy or paper or both. The handwriting was still legible, but it had a quality to it I recognized from incident reports I'd read after bad calls. The kind written by people who were holding themselves together by focusing on the task of writing. He knew what was coming. He just didn't know exactly when. I got to the back pages. There was a list. Handwritten, 2 columns, names on the left and dates on the right. The dates were spaced out, roughly 5 years apart, going back to the late 1800s. Most of the names I didn't recognize, but some of them I did. Not from knowing the people, just from that cemetery off Route 12. Harold Brandt, Cecilia Moore, Frank Okafor. I'd driven past those markers twice now, and they'd registered the way names do when you're not paying attention, but your brain files them anyway. They were on the list. Every one of them had a date next to their name and a line drawn through it. The list went down the page. I counted. Didn't want to, but I did. 22 names, 22 crossed out. Then at the bottom, 2 names without lines through them. Ronald Salinas. His name was there, no line yet when he'd written the list, but someone had drawn through it since. The ink was different, darker, added later. And below Ronald's name, in the same small print as the rest of the list, was mine, Caleb Sanchez. No line through it. I sat with that for a minute. The logbook was open on the desk, and I was looking at my own name at the bottom of a list of dead people. And I was trying to think about it practically, which is what I do when something is too large to look at directly. I'm a firefighter. Was a firefighter. You don't stand in front of a structure fire and feel your feelings about it. You assess, you prioritize, you move. So I was trying to do that. I was trying to think about what the information meant, and what it required, and what the next step was. But I kept coming back to Tommy handing me that laminated card. That flat tone, that slow drawl, family tradition, century-old insurance purposes. The way he hadn't blinked. The way he'd answered every question I had before I asked it, because he'd done this before. Because there was a list, and he'd worked through it, and I was just the next item on it. Lewis, too. The way Lewis moved through the mill like someone who knew where not to step. The way he checked the air. The way he told me the rules weren't about insurance without telling me what they actually were. Whether that made him complicit or just trapped in the same machinery, I didn't know. I hadn't decided. I looked at the date next to my name. There wasn't one yet, just the name, waiting. I closed the logbook and put it on the desk in front of me and looked at the window. The spotlight was on the tree line. The pines sat pale and still at the edge of the dark. The booth hummed with the sound of the monitors and the coffee maker and the distant low pressure of the boilers running somewhere below. I had a lot of night left. The phone rang at 3 in the morning. I know it was 3 because I'd just looked at my watch. 3 exactly, like it had been waiting for the minute to tick over. The phone was a landline, one of those old wall-mounted units with a coiled cord, the kind that belongs in a break room from 1987. It hung on the back wall of the booth between the emergency kit and a laminated fire evacuation map nobody had updated since 2004. I'd never heard it ring before. Hadn't thought much about it. I thought about it now. I stood up and turned around and looked at it. Just looked. Didn't move toward it. The logbook was still on the desk in front of me, and I was very aware of what it said about the phone. 4 rings. Don't answer after 4 rings. That was the rule. Simple enough. I was good at simple rules. 14 years of fire-ground communication will do that to you. You follow the protocol, or people get hurt. You don't improvise until you understand what you're working with. I counted. 1, 2. The sound was completely normal. Just a phone ringing. That cheap electronic trill that wall units make. Nothing weird about it. I almost picked it up on instinct, the way you do when you've spent years taking emergency calls. When a ringing phone means something's happening and someone needs information right now. My hand actually moved a little. I caught it. 3. I pulled my hand back and held it at my side. 4. I waited. The phone kept ringing. I'd expected silence. I don't know why, exactly. I think I just assumed the rule implied that whatever was calling would give up after 4 rings. That the 4-ring limit was the window, and if you didn't answer, you'd closed it. That was the logic I'd applied to it. Practical logic, reasonable logic. The phone kept ringing anyway. 5, 6, 7. I stopped counting out loud in my head and just stood there listening to it. The monitors on the desk hummed. The coffee maker clicked. The boilers pushed their low, steady pressure through the walls. And underneath all of it, the phone rang and rang and rang. Then it started changing. It was gradual enough that I almost talked myself out of noticing it. The pitch shifted first, just slightly, the way a recording sounds when the tape is running a little slow. Then the rhythm stretched. The gaps between rings got longer, and the rings themselves got longer, and by the time I registered what was happening, the sound had moved away from anything a phone makes, and into something else entirely. It was a woman, screaming, not like a horror movie, not theatrical. It was the specific sound of someone in real pain who has been making that sound for a long time, and doesn't have much left. I'd heard it twice in my career. Once at a house fire on the north side, 2nd floor. Once at a car accident on the Eisenhower. Both times it had meant something was very wrong and I needed to move immediately. I didn't move. I stood there, and I held the rule in my head. Don't answer after 4 rings. And I held it hard because every instinct I had from 14 years of emergency work was screaming at me to pick up that phone and find out where she was and what was happening. That's the thing nobody tells you about conditioning. It doesn't go away just because the context changes. It just fires whether you want it to or not. The screaming filled the booth for 10 minutes. I know it was 10 minutes because I watched the clock on the monitor. I didn't look away from it. I needed something to anchor to, and the clock was the most neutral thing in the room. The second hand moved. I watched it move. The screaming went on. I looked out the window. There was a figure standing on top of the cedar stacks. The cedar stacks were maybe 40 yards out, tall enough that the top of them was level with the 2nd floor catwalk. Whatever was standing up there was standing very still. I could see it clearly because the spotlight was on the tree line, and the ambient light from it caught the yard in that flat gray way security lighting does. Enough to see shapes, not enough to see detail. But I could see the shape. I could see the proportions. It was Tommy Park. Or it was wearing Tommy Park's face, which is a distinction I want to be precise about. The height was right. The lean, angular build was right. The long arms were right. But the arms were too long. Not a little too long. Wrong. They hung past the knees, and the way they moved when the figure shifted its weight was not how arms move. The elbows bent in the wrong direction. Not backward exactly, more like the joint was in a different place than it should be. And when it moved, the whole arm moved in sections, like something assembled rather than grown. It started coming down the stack. I want to say it climbed down. That's not quite right. It descended in these short, jerking drops, each movement separate from the last. No flow between them, like watching a video file that keeps skipping frames. Down a foot, pause. Down another foot, pause. The arms moved independently of the body during each drop, reaching and adjusting in ways that made me think of the way industrial shears open and close. I'd heard that sound on the roof 8 nights ago. I understood now what had been up there. I kept my eyes on its face. That was the rule. Don't look at its feet. I did not look at its feet. I fixed my eyes on Tommy Park's face, and I held them there, and the face was completely still while the body moved, which was the worst part, actually. The face just sat there looking like Tommy, calm and flat and institutional, while the body underneath it jerked and dropped and clicked its way down the cedar stack. It reached the ground. It stopped. It stood in the yard and looked at me through the booth window, and I looked back at it, and the screaming from the phone was still going, and I was very aware that I had not moved, and that I had followed the rule, and that none of that seemed to have resolved anything. Then something knocked on the glass, right beside my head. I turned, and Luis Herrera's face was at the window. Luis in his gray coveralls, his broad, flat nose, his deep-set eyes. He was pounding on the glass with his palm, and his mouth was moving, and I couldn't hear him over the screaming, so I read his lips. "Boiler," he was saying. "Boiler exploded. Get out! Get out now!" My hand went to the door handle. The emergency siren went off. It was loud enough that it cut through the screaming from the phone, loud enough that I felt it in my back teeth. I froze with my hand on the handle, and I looked out at the yard. No smoke, no heat shimmer, no orange light from anywhere in the complex. I'd spent 14 years knowing what a fire looks like at night, and there was no fire. The siren was screaming, and the phone was screaming, and Luis was pounding on the glass, and there was nothing burning. I looked back at Luis. His face was wrong. The skin was loose, not sagging the way skin sags on an old person, but loose the way a mask is loose. Like the thing underneath it was a different shape, and the face on top of it couldn't quite conform. The edges near his hairline had pulled away a little. Underneath, where there should have been skin and bone, there was something dark, textured, the color of old bark, the kind you find on a fallen cedar that's been on the ground for years, going soft and black at the edges. Luis Herrera was not at my window. I stepped back from the door. More of them came out of the tree line. I saw Teresa Harrison first, the woman from the diner on Main Street, the one who'd refilled my coffee twice and told me the pie was better on Thursdays. Her face was on something tall and wrong proportioned, moving through the yard with that same frame-skipping jerk. Behind her, the gas station kid. Patrick, I thought his name was. Dirty blonde hair, light blue eyes, the face of someone completely forgettable until you see it on something that isn't him. They came to the booth, all of them. They surrounded it on 3 sides, and they pressed their faces close to the glass, and they tapped on it with their fingers. The fingers tapered at the tips into something pale and pointed. Not nails, wood. Pale wood, like freshly cut cedar, smooth and dry. The siren kept going. The phone kept going. The faces pressed against every window of the booth, watching me with expressions that didn't move. And I stood in the middle of it, with my back to the desk and the logbook behind me, and my hand no longer on the door. The thing that hit me wasn't fear. It was something more like math. I stood there with my back to the desk and the faces at every window, and I just started adding things up. The spotlight rule. Keep it on the tree line, not the road. Tommy had explained that one like it was about insurance liability, about deterring trespassers from the forest side. But you don't deter something by lighting it up. You locate it. You keep a beacon on it so it knows exactly where to go. I'd been turning that light on every night and pointing it at the trees like I was sending a signal. Because I was. The phone rule. Don't answer after 4 rings. I'd thought that one was about not engaging with whatever was on the other end. But it wasn't. It was a timer. 4 rings was the window. After that, you were supposed to leave it alone. Stay put. Stay in the booth. Stay contained. The siren rule. If it sounds without a fire, stay inside and open the door for no one. I'd read that one and thought it was protecting me from something outside. It wasn't. It was keeping me in a box. All of it. Every rule on that laminated card. Not one of them was designed to keep me safe. They were designed to keep me in place, cooperative and calm, until whatever schedule Tommy was running reached its end date. Ronald Salinas had written the words right there in the logbook. A periodic offering. I'd read it and felt sick and then kept reading like the next page was going to tell me it was a joke. Tommy Park didn't hire a night security guard. He filled a slot. I stopped looking at the faces at the windows. I turned around and opened the desk drawer. The flare gun was in the emergency kit, a bright orange case with a cracked latch that I'd noticed on my first night and never thought about again. I popped it open. 2 flares loaded, 1 spare. I pocketed the spare. Under the sink there was a gallon jug of industrial degreaser. I'd seen Lewis move it once to get to the pipe valve behind it. It was the kind of stuff that came with a warning label that was mostly just the word flammable in 3 different font sizes. I grabbed it by the handle. The faces were still at the windows, not moving, not making sounds anymore, just watching with those fixed expressions that didn't shift, didn't blink right, didn't do any of the small automatic things a face is supposed to do. The fingers were still on the glass. I didn't look at them directly. I went to the door. The thing wearing Lewis's face was still on the other side of it. I could see the shape of it through the door's small window. The skin had kept slipping. Whatever was underneath was dark and ridged, like the surface of old bark. It stood there with Lewis's jaw and Lewis's hairline and something completely wrong in the space between. I kicked the door open hard. It caught the thing in the shoulder and knocked it sideways. I didn't wait to see what it did next. I went out fast, twisted the cap off the degreaser jug and started moving around the perimeter of the booth. I just poured. Walls, base, the wooden steps, the underside of the overhang. The degreaser hit the sheet metal and ran down in sheets, pooled at the base, soaked into the wood of the steps. The smell was sharp and chemical, and it cut right through the burnt hair smell that had been sitting in my sinuses for the last hour. The figures pulled back. Not far. Maybe 10 feet. They stood in a rough circle and watched me do it. I don't know if they understood what I was doing or if they just didn't like the smell. Either way, they gave me room and I used it. I raised the flare gun and fired at the base of the booth wall. The degreaser caught immediately. Not a slow creep. It went up fast, a column of orange and blue chemical fire that hit the overhang and rolled upward along the sheet metal. The booth wasn't a big structure, but it burned like it was. The heat pushed out in a wave and I stepped back from it and the figures did too, faster than they'd moved before. They made a sound. I don't have a good word for it. It was high and sharp, and it came from all of them at once. And then they were moving, pulling back toward the yard, away from the fire. I ran for my truck. It was parked on the near side of the equipment lot, maybe 150 feet from the booth. I'd made it about 40 feet when I stopped. The tall one was in the way. It had been wearing Tommy's proportions when I first saw it on the cedar stack. That same lean, angular frame, the long arms. It wasn't that anymore. It was taller, a lot taller, 10 feet, maybe a little more. The skin had gone the color of charred cedar bark, dark brown and cracked, and it stood in the middle of the path to the parking area with its arms hanging at its sides. It wasn't moving, it was just there. I didn't look at its face, I didn't look at its feet. I'd read the rule and I didn't know exactly why those two things mattered, but I'd also read the part of the logbook where Ronald wrote about the man who looked and what happened after, and Ronald's handwriting had gotten very small and very careful for that particular entry. I looked at the forklift. It was a big yellow Yale unit parked about 30 feet to my right, one of 3 in the equipment lot. It had a full propane tank mounted on the back, the kind that's about the size of a large barbecue cylinder. I'd seen the maintenance crew swap one out during my first week. I raised the flare gun. I was not a great shot under normal circumstances. I want to be honest about that. I'd fired flare guns twice in my life before that night. Both times in training, both times at the open water. But the tank was close and it was a big target, and I was running on something that wasn't quite adrenaline, more like a very focused kind of anger, and I fired. The flare hit the tank casing and bounced off. I had 1 second to feel completely stupid about my entire plan. Then the propane ignited and the forklift went up. The explosion was loud enough that I felt it in my sternum. A wall of fire rolled sideways off the forklift and hit the nearest lumber stack, a row of fresh-cut cedar about 15 feet high, bone-dry, stacked tight. Cedar burns fast. Anybody who's done wildland work knows that. It went from a lumber stack to a solid wall of fire in about 30 seconds, and the fire moved down the row and jumped to the next stack and kept going. The tall figure in my path made the same sharp sound the others had made, but bigger, and it moved. Not toward me. Away, toward the tree line. It moved fast for something that size, lurching and wrong-angled, and it went into the dark between the pines and it was gone. I ran for my truck. The fire was spreading through the stacks in both directions. I could feel the heat on the back of my neck. I got to the truck, got the door open, got the key in the ignition. The engine turned over on the first try, which I was genuinely grateful for because I don't know what my backup plan was. I looked at the yard once through the windshield. The booth was fully involved, just a burning frame at this point. The lumber stacks were going stack by stack, a long line of fire moving toward the main structure of the mill. The figures from the tree line were gone. Every face I'd seen at the windows, Teresa Harrison, Patrick from the gas station, the thing wearing Lewis, all of it had pulled back into the Clearwater forest. I put the truck in drive. The gate at the end of the access road was closed and padlocked. I didn't slow down. The gate took out my front bumper cover. I heard it snap off and skid across the gravel behind me, and I kept going. The access road was about a mile of packed dirt and loose rock, and I drove it faster than I should have. My headlights caught the tree line on both sides, and I kept my eyes on the road, just the road, the pale strip of it between the dark walls of pine. My hands were doing okay. My hands were steadier than they had any right to be. The rest of me was running on something that wasn't quite adrenaline anymore, something flatter and more mechanical. Just keep moving. That was the whole plan. I hit the county road and turned west without thinking about it. The tires caught pavement and the truck stopped shaking. I got up to 50 and held it there. Behind me, through the rear window, the sky above the tree line was orange, not sunrise orange, fire orange. The mill was going. I could see the glow of it even through the pines, a wide, warm pulse against the black sky. I watched it for about 3 seconds in the rearview mirror, and then I stopped watching. I drove. The county road was empty. Not a single car, not a single lit window in any of the farmhouses I passed. It was maybe 4:30 in the morning, maybe closer to 5. I hadn't looked at my phone since before the siren went off, and I didn't look at it now. There was a gas station I'd stopped at twice before, a little shell on the edge of a crossroads about 8 miles from the mill. I pulled in, filled the tank without getting out of the truck for more than 2 minutes, and kept going. My hands were still steady. I noticed that again. Weird, but I didn't spend much time on it. The sun started coming up somewhere around 6, that pale flat light that doesn't feel warm yet, just bright. The trees thinned out a little as I got closer to town, and I could see the sky properly for the first time in hours. Blue coming in at the edges. Normal sky. I'd missed normal sky. I was about 5 miles outside of Orofino when I saw him. Tommy Park was standing on the shoulder of the road, just standing there, facing the direction I'd come from, looking east, watching the column of smoke that was still rising above the pines maybe 5 or 6 miles back. He had his hands in the pockets of his canvas work trousers, same flannel shirt, same heavy boots. He looked like a man watching a field burn, just waiting for it to be done. I had maybe 3 seconds of warning before I reached him, enough time to decide. I didn't slow down. He didn't move either, didn't turn his head, didn't raise a hand. I passed him at 50 miles an hour and watched him shrink in my mirror, just a tall, lean figure standing at the road's edge with smoke rising behind him. His face had been blank. Not surprised, not angry, not anything. Just a man watching something end that he'd been managing for a long time. I thought about that for a while as I drove. The thing about Tommy was that he'd always been calm. First day, handing me that laminated card, the walkthrough of the property, the way he'd explain the rules like they were OSHA requirements, like he was reading from a manual. I thought he was just one of those flat, institutional people, the kind who runs a mill or a warehouse and talks about everything in terms of procedure and liability. Turns out he was, just not for the reasons I thought. The liability he was managing was 100 years old and it ate people. I don't know if he could have stopped what happened. I don't think he wanted to. I think the mill burning was a problem for him in the ordinary sense, the business sense. But the other part of it, the part where I'd broken whatever arrangement his family had been keeping, I think that part was just done, closed out. He looked like a man whose paperwork had cleared. That bugged me a little, the calm of it. But I kept driving. I passed through Orofino without stopping. I'd thought about stopping, getting coffee somewhere, sitting down for 10 minutes like a normal person. But the diner on Main Street was where I'd met Teresa Harrison, and I didn't want to sit in a booth and look at the door and think about what had been wearing her face. So I drove through. The town was just waking up. A few trucks at a red light. A guy walking a dog on the sidewalk outside a hardware store. Normal stuff. I drove through it like it was scenery. The interstate took me east first, then south. I wasn't going anywhere specific, not yet. I just needed the highway. I needed lanes and mile markers and the sound of other cars. I put the radio on and got a country station out of Lewiston and left it there even though I don't really like country music. It was fine. It was noise. I drove through most of the day. I stopped twice, once for gas, and once because my back had locked up enough that I needed to stand outside for a few minutes and stretch against the side of the truck like an old man. The back injury had been with me since the collapse in Chicago, 18 months before Orofino, and it didn't care about context. It just hurt when it hurt. I stood there in a rest area somewhere in Montana, pressing my knuckles into the muscles above my hip, watching semis go by on the interstate, and I thought about the logbook. Ronald Salinas. The names crossed out at 5-year intervals. I thought about how ordinary his early entries had been, same as mine. Just a guy doing a quiet job, reading paperbacks, drinking bad coffee. I got back in the truck. I called my sister from a gas station in Billings. She picked up on the second ring, which surprised me. It was late afternoon by then. I told her I was coming back to Chicago. She asked why. I said the job hadn't worked out. She asked if I was okay. I said, yeah, I'm okay. She was quiet for a second, and then she said, okay, the couch is yours until you find a place. I said thanks. That was the whole conversation. It was enough. I got to Chicago 11 days later. I didn't drive straight through. I stopped in small motels and slept in chunks and ate at diners and gas stations and tried to let the miles do what miles are supposed to do, which is put distance between you and the thing behind you. It worked okay. Not completely, but okay. Chicago in November is gray and cold, and the wind off the lake cuts right through whatever you're wearing. I'd forgotten that. I stood outside my sister's apartment building on Kedzie with my duffel bag and looked at the street, at the parked cars and the bare trees in the median and the L tracks running overhead, and I thought, yeah, this is fine. The trees on Kedzie are ornamental. They don't go anywhere. They're just trees. I found a place of my own by February. A second-floor apartment on the north side, 3 blocks from a hardware store and a laundromat. I got a job doing safety inspections for a commercial property management company, which sounds boring and is, and I was genuinely happy about that. Daytime hours, office buildings. The most dangerous thing I encountered in the first month was a fire extinguisher that needed recertification. I still have the logbook. I don't know why I kept it. I grabbed it off the desk sometime during the chaos, and it ended up in my duffel bag, and I never threw it out. It's in a box in my closet right now, under some old gear from my firefighting days. I haven't opened it since I left Idaho. I probably won't, but I haven't thrown it out either. There's a highway outside the city, I-90 going east, where the road cuts through a long stretch of woods somewhere past Indiana. At night, your headlights hit the tree line on both sides, and for about 2 miles, it's just dark pines pressing up against the shoulder. I've driven that stretch maybe a dozen times since I got back. I keep my eyes straight ahead. I know the route by heart,